Hey, this is Brian Durgan here, host of Full Belly Laughs, and you are listening to the BS Podcast Network.
I'm coming. I hate to think I'm gonna miss anything. And now we can go somewhere for an interesting talk.
Friends of yours, no doubt. Come in.
You dressed quickly, too. I didn't see that gun in the mirror.
Not that it matters, but that was under the pillow all the time.
And when did you find out?
Well, you're wearing the same ring as Margot.
It's a ring I like to wear.
Vanity has its dangers.
Vanity, Mr. Bond. Something you know so much about.
My dear girl, don't flatter yourself. What I did this evening was for king and country. You don't think it gave me any pleasure, do you?
Of course, I forgot your ego, Mr. Bond. James Bond, who only has to make love to a woman and she starts to hear heavenly choir singing. She repents and immediately returns to the side of right and virtue. But not this one. What a blow it must have been. You having a failure.
Well, you can't win them all.
I'm Batman.
Who are you?
My name is...
Bond.
Bond.
Batman.
Name's Bond.
James Bond.
I'm Batman.
Bond. James Bond. I'm Batman. I'm Batman.
This is the Batman vs. James Bond show. The show covering everything related to Batman and James Bond movies. And now, here's your host, Brian Thomas.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to an all-new episode of the Batman vs. James Bond show. The name's Thomas, Brian Thomas, and I am your host. And this is the show where we discuss everything related to Batman and James Bond movies. It's great to be back. Oh, yeah. I hope all of you have had a fantastic week. Mine was excellent, or so far it's been pretty good. All right, yeah, I'll confess. My wife is out of town on vacation right now, and I am, well, I said living the high life, but honestly, I think I have a bigger honey-do list than when she normally is here. But that's besides the point. Overall, everything has been good. I have my 2 4-legged daughters watching over me and keeping me super busy. But in the meantime, I'd like to welcome a very special guest, the editor of For His Eyes Only, The Women of James Bond, and author of Warrior Women and her most recent book, Geographies, Genders, and Geopolitics of James Bond, Dr. Lisa Funnell. How are you, ma'am? Welcome to the show.
Hello.
It is a pleasure to have you on the show. Let me just say this. I said I was going to save something for when I was talking to you just before the show started recording. You are the honorary first female guest on the show. No pressure, okay?
No pressure at all.
No, and it's almost embarrassing to me. I'm like, you know what? I've never had, and I'm not counting my wife. She might have, come on just briefly, ever so slightly. But I mean, you are the first official female guest. So, I must say that, when I saw about your book and, you said about what you actually teach, I'm like, we need to talk. We need to talk like yesterday. Because it's actually something that, for listeners on the show that have been listening more recently, I have been talking about what we're going to be talking about, and I definitely want your opinion on a number of certain things, but no pressure. So, Lisa will be joining me throughout the whole rest of the episode. I did warn her I like to talk, so you're in store for a 7-hour episode. I'm just kidding. Just a full 1 hour.
Full 7 hour.
No, it won't be 7 hour. Hour and a half, maybe. So before we jump into things, just a reminder. BatmanVSBond.com. That's right. You know the name. It doesn't have a number, but you can go there for the latest shows and more content. And you can also find the show on the BS Podcast Network. That's bspodcastnetwork.com. Find my show and a whole bunch of other great shows on there. Now, let's get down to business. Just for me and for the listeners to get to know you a little bit better, Lisa, just a few simple questions. Now, I know you are a, professor, so don't worry, this isn't like a pop quiz, okay? Like I said, you didn't need to study for this at all, okay? It's very simple, and well, maybe it's not. I don't know, because I know if somebody asked me on the spot that I might get a little technical about this, but what is your favorite James Bond movie? And if you need to break it down into actors, that's okay.
Oh gosh, that is such a hard question to answer. That's the worst question to ask. I can handle anything else. Ask me anything else. I definitely have a handful of films that I really enjoy.
Okay.
I really like Casino Royale. And I also like GoldenEye. So for me, I guess Martin Campbell just seems to have an ability to connect with me and resonate. I really like Thunderball. I love Fiona Volpe, and I love the way that she challenges James Bond. I love Octopussy. I grew up watching that and really connected with the idea of an island full of like empowered women fighting for themselves.
Who wouldn't want? What guy wouldn't want that? Absolutely, yeah.
But what woman wouldn't also want to be like completely empowered by sisterhood and there's something about it that has always resonated with me. And it's funny when I show that one in my gender and James Bond class, my students come in thinking it's going to be the worst one because of the name. They think it's going to be, incredibly sexist. And a lot of them come out thinking, wow, this is actually better than I thought. So that one has an interesting dynamic. So I guess that's a top 4 list, maybe.
That's a great list. It really is. I know the first James Bond movie I ever officially saw was GoldenEye, and that's stuck with me ever since then. I still have the poster hanging up behind me. Just going back, anytime that happens to be on TV or I just have a go-to, you can't go wrong with GoldenEye. I think it has everything that a Bond movie, or what I come to enjoy in a Bond movie anyway. And the characters in there, aside from, I don't even mind the Eric Serra score in there. I know some people don't like that, but overall, I think it's almost perfect. Casino Royale is definitely a good choice. I know that more recently, a lot of people really do enjoy that, just the kind of spin that Martin Campbell and the writers put on with that James Bond. Lose the gadgets, go back to basics, not even Moneypenny or Q are in there. And you just have this, I don't want to say novice agent, but just a new 00 agent and learning who to trust. And, post 9/11, really good character study on that of what makes James Bond James Bond. So very good choices there. And I would like to say that last year I met the actress who played Fiona Volpe, and I met her actually 1 year ago at this time, and she was a delight. She really, really was. And I was like a little fanboy. I was dumbfounded. I had no idea what to say to her. I really did. I'm like, can I take a picture with you? And she's like, oh, you're so sweet. Of course you can. And I'm like, thank you. And then,
I would do the same thing. I would totally go fan crazy.
But the funny part about it is I'm telling my wife, I'm like, oh, well, I'm going to this convention and, I'm going to meet 2 Bond girls because I met Britt Eklund, who played Goodnight in The Man with the Golden Gun. And, she's thinking when she sees the older pictures of her, they're like, you're going to, and you say Bond girl, she gets immediately jealous. And rightfully so. I understand that. And then she's like, oh, they're older. I'm like, well, yeah, some of these movies were made in the 60s and 70s. So yeah. And, so needless to say, she's okay with that. But next week this upcoming week, I'll be meeting Maud Adams. So I will have to, definitely try not to step on my tongue too much and try not to be as dumbfounded as before.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
She's amazing. So I would be stuttering the entire time.
The thing is, I have no idea really what to say to her because I just want to say that, I'm a huge, huge fan. I loved you in both movies and you're incredibly gorgeous and you're very talented. And, so I'm nervous, but I'm looking forward to it at the same time.
I would say go with the talented first.
Yeah.
And then maybe like gorgeous after, because we tend to value women for their beauty first and everything else second. So it's always nice as a woman to hear about internal qualities and accomplishments.
Yeah.
Rather than just beauty.
Good point.
That's just a suggestion.
Oh, I'm all open for suggestions because I know that she probably gets asked the same questions all the time. What was it like to work with Roger Moore twice? What was it like to be one of the very few Bond girls twice? Things like that. So I hate asking those same questions. It's just the nerdy fanboy in line just trying to get a picture and an autograph and a selfie. So, all right, let me ask you this. Do you have a favorite actor who's portrayed James Bond?
Well, It's funny that you should say that, because at the end of my gender and James Bond class, 2 of my students got me pictures of Pierce Brosnan that were framed.
Ooh.
And apparently I had expressed my love for Pierce Brosnan multiple times over the course of the class. I didn't realize that. But I also grew up watching the Roger Moore films. Mm-hmm. And so to me, he's always Bond. I loved his wit. I loved the fact that his films were exciting and adventurous. I like funny men in general. I would prefer to laugh rather than cry in life. So I definitely loved his take on it. And I feel as though, even though he's passed on, when we see his legacy, he was somebody who truly embraced being James Bond and loved his fans and loved to talk about playing this character. He was such a great, I would say, brand ambassador for the James Bond franchise. And so for me, because of all of that and the person that he is, he's really crept up there to my top Bond.
Yeah. When he passed, I guess it's been almost 3 months, give or take, but he passed earlier in the year. And yeah, I gotta say, it hit me. And I know it hit probably a lot of Bond fans and fans of him in The Saint and his other movies. But I guess and I was kind of surprised because I had been watching the Roger Moore Bond films since I always go back to my dad's collection. Spy Who Loved Me, For Your Eyes Only, Octopussy, A View to a Kill, and I know which ones are my favorite, The Spy Who Loved Me and For Your Eyes Only, but besides the fact, I would say that, I guess because I'm so used to watching it all the time, and it just kind of hit me in a way. Just like, man, this really sucks. There's no other way to put it, I guess. But, his legacy will live on. I mean, especially being, well, I would say still being in the most amount of Bond films, but just his personality, his character, his charm that he brought to that. Like you said, not many actors and actresses also for any, movie that they're stereotyped as a character embrace it. He did. Mm-hmm. So, very good choice there. So do you have, this one's more tailored for you. Do you have a favorite Bond girl or Bond female woman?
I love Michelle Yeoh. So, Wei Lin from Tomorrow Never Dies is a figure that always stuck with me because she not only matched Bond, but she completely surpassed Bond in terms of her skill set, her abilities. She was also a secret agent. She had her own set of spy gadgets, and it was Bond who was the one who, in many respects, had to sort of take a side seat to her in a variety of different situations. And I loved her so much that I actually wrote then a dissertation on Chinese warrior women to actually go and see, how did Michelle Yeoh, like, where did she come from? How did she learn how to be such an amazing action woman? And so that led me down another path of research. So she has always been somebody who is up there for me when it comes to just seeing the women of Bond and what they can achieve.
Definitely. Yeah, I think almost she gets forgotten sometimes. I mean, Tomorrow Never Dies is, I like it. It's not my favorite Bond film. I think GoldenEye still remains one of my favorites. Well, definitely my favorite out of the Pierce era, but top 5. But Tomorrow Never Dies is one of those I can turn on, enjoy it. And, I love the scene in there. Well, a couple scenes of hers specifically. Sorry, those are my dogs. 2 of the scenes that always stand out for me are the one where she has her little fight sequence actually she locks James Bond up with the handcuffs to the pipe and she's like, I work alone. And I'm like, oh, cold shoulder. Okay. And then she goes into her little shop there and has this kick-ass fight sequence where she did, I believe, all of her own stunts in there.
And she brought in her own stunt team that she worked with beforehand. That's why it looks so different visually.
Yeah. And And then after that, she has like when we're still in the shop or her pad, whatever you want to call it, then she has like this nice little Q lab set up and has all the weapons. She has all these gadgets in there. I'm like, this girl, I was like, this is awesome. And she's like, well, we've made some improvements. I'm like, wow, okay. Somebody, she might be one of the, like you said, more female competitors for James Bond, or almost outshines him in a way, because she's the one supplying him with all this. She's the one who's kind of saving his ass also.
Yep,
definitely. So, all right, let me ask you this. With the general conception of Bond women, and let me ask you this. Do you get offended by when somebody says Bond girl, Bond woman?
That's a hard question to answer because I think on the one hand, the term Bond girl is so pervasive right now in terms of our culture, that it's really hard to utilize any other term where people are going to know who you're talking about.
Yeah.
I prefer the women of Bond in a general sense.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the term girl has often been used as a way to diminish the capacity of women by being, by infantilizing them in some ways. So we always have to be careful about the terms that we use. I also don't like the term Bond girl because it means that these women don't have like autonomous identities, that, you know, that who they are is completely connected to who James Bond is. And when we look at all the other supporting figures, we don't use the term Bond boy to refer to the men who appear. And again, when you use the term boy for a man, it could be seen in a very sort of negative, put down, derogatory way. So I think the term in and of itself is a bit problematic. And then I think our use of the term is problematic. So one of the first things that I did when I started researching the Bond girl was really try to figure out a way to start untangling the number and the diversity of women who are around. So I utilized the term Bond girl for the lead female hero or protagonist in the film. And I utilize other terms. So a female villain, some people use bad girl, some people use Bond girl villain, to start separating out main characters. And then there's a whole bunch of secondary figures who appear. So I think it's really important that we start thinking about the diversity and range of women because they serve different purposes. And I think it's easy to dismiss all the women if we just use the term Bond girl and say, oh, they don't do anything. They're just these, you know, sexy window dressings who don't contribute to the narrative. It's really important, I think, to start being careful about the language that we use, but untangling this sort of web of women. And that was the goal of the book that I edited for His Eyes Only the Women of James Bond, was really like, how do we untangle and view all these different women and what they're doing and how they're contributing. And so essays are all over the place with that in the book, but they really start sort of untangling it in ways that are really thought-provoking.
Yeah, I was going to say that the phrase Bond girl's been around forever, at least from what I remember anyway. I mean, I'm an 80s.
Our lifetimes, at least.
I'm an 80s kid, so, you know, as far back as that goes, at least. So I would imagine they were using this in the 60s. But what I was saying is the general conception of Bond women is that they are the damsel in distress, which I completely disagree with, because unless you have never seen a Bond movie, then you don't know about characters like, you know, like you said, Michelle Yeoh and Tomorrow Never Dies. And even before that, going back all the way to the 60s, about what, you know, how an actress was portrayed in these movies and how she was coming toe to toe with Bond. So, and even, I would say, Dr. No, I would say, going back to Ursula Andress, to Honey Rider, she wasn't, I mean, yes, she's a damsel in distress, but at the same time, she's like, he's like, I promise I won't steal your shells. She's like, I promise you won't either. She's like, she's not scared of James Bond. And then she puts the knife away. I mean, of course, though, she was the eye candy of that. And it always comes back to that, of her in the white bikini.
And the fact that she loses her pants at some point in time, like she's wearing pink pants and then she gets tied down in some part of the lair and she has no pants on. And I always wonder at the end of the film, like, where are her pants? Like, you didn't need to take off her pants in order to tie her down. So that sort of feeds into this notion of being set up as an object of desire.
Yeah. Yeah.
Where did her pants go? I still don't understand. Where are they?
I might have to go back and watch that tonight, you know. Yeah, but
just to look for it.
Yeah, just to look for her pants, because she does walk around the majority of the movie. I mean, it's the second half of the movie. Spoiler alert for anybody who hasn't seen this, but not since 1962. But yeah, she's walking around in either the white bikini or then she's in just a white shirt with no shorts or pants on. She wears a very skimpy dress to dinner with Dr. No and James Bond, and then, like you said, the pants just disappear. So, hey, you know, where did those pants go? Remains a mystery.
That's my question. That's my lingering question about Dr. No. Like, where are her pants?
All right, so we'll send that out to the listeners. If you know what happened to Honey Rider's pants, please send me an email, batmanvjamesbond@gmail.com. CC Lisa on there, too. Well, all right. Well, going back just with the night, I mean, I'm going to try to cover as many of the eras of James Bond because you even did an article in a book called "Bad Girls of James Bond." But just the idea of the '60s Bond girl, as you said, is more of like a model of adjustment, a dependent and a derivative character that is tailored to fulfill the sexual needs of Bond. And you're absolutely spot on correct with that because you look at all of those and we'll look past Honey Rider because she doesn't come in later to the end, but you look at the very beginning to the two Bond girls that are in there. What is their real purpose besides, just kind of flirting with James Bond? Well, he goes to bed with them.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, if we look at the type of heroic masculinity that's being presented, James Bond's part of the British lover literary tradition. That's where he stems from, where James Bond fights not only for the cause that he loves, and oftentimes that cause is seen in relation to queen and country. So there's even a feminized connotation to that, but it's also his masculinity is confirmed by the things that he does for the women that he loves and his ability to seduce and sexually satisfy women. And so when we look at these films, I feel as though they're two different types of women. I love the 1960s films because I think that they're populated with a lot more women and a greater, I think, diversity of women. But you tend to have like the Bond girl who's supposed to be the good girl, his love interest. And even though she might be completely single, she might have a liberal sexual identity. By the end of the film, she's with him. And so there's this notion that she becomes more of a safe woman because she sort of falls within, dominant, gender roles and patriarchal order, right?
Right.
And then you have the villainous women. And why I find them so fascinating is because they challenge Bond. They challenge his libido. Fiona Volpe is the one who says, "But I forgot your ego, Mr. Bond, James Bond. He only has to sleep with a woman. And all these heavenly choirs are going to sing, but not this one," right?
Yes.
And she says, "I refuse to repent." So she challenges James Bond. She refuses to play that role of domesticated Bond girl. And that's, of course, the reason why she has to die, right? Because she's this challenge that needs to be taken out. So you see this balance between good women and bad women, and they're defined in relation to how they relate to Bond and his libido. But I also think that compared to, say, the films of the 1970s and 1980s, where villainous women disappear, I mean, they're gone. They play these really limited roles. The films of the 1960s I find fascinating because they're not as formulaic, and there's a little bit more flexibility, even when you do have a woman who does sort of fall into the Bond girl mold. So someone like Domino Derval, she definitely is, in a sense, a damsel in distress. But at the end of the film, she is the one who kills Largo.
Right. She saves Bond. Yeah.
Yeah. And she saves James Bond. And so there's something for me so empowering about that, being able to, I don't want to say kill, but take vengeance on and protect this person that you love, but also take vengeance on this person who has wronged you and who has, assaulted you. I mean, he was putting out cigarettes on her body beforehand. Mm-hmm. And I think that's when I think about all of this stuff, I then look at a film. I don't mean to jump so far ahead, but to a film like Skyfall, which I think is incredibly regressive in terms of its representation, where you have a figure like Severine, who is this sex worker who has been used by men her entire life. She's this kept woman of Silva. I still have issues with James Bond sleeping with her, knowing that she's a sex worker trying to get out. And she doesn't have a redemption narrative. She doesn't have a chance to speak out or get away from Silva. And instead she's used as target practice. And nobody even comments on the fact that she died. They lament on the loss of Scotch. So when I think about that, we have this notion of progress. Like, if time passes, things get better. That's the broader notion of progress. I think that is a problematic intention, because I don't necessarily think that things can always necessarily get better as time goes on. And I compare those two, and I'm like, yeah, but Domino had the opportunity, and Domino could step up in ways that, say, other women were not allowed to step up. And I would say, you mentioned you're going to go see Maude Adams. It would be like Andrea Anders in The Man with the Golden Gun, somebody who is definitely imprisoned, or she's the kept woman of Scaramanga, who I think, by the way, is a great villain.
Yes.
Love Scaramanga. But she doesn't have the opportunity to liberate herself. And instead, in this process of bringing James Bond in and really trying to, in a sense, take out Scaramanga, she dies. She just doesn't have that opportunity to sort of step up in ways, again, that, some of the women in the 1960s actually did. So it's an interesting dynamic.
Yeah. Well, before I lose my train of thought here, even with Maud Adams and Andrea Anders and The Man with the Golden Gun, she was, how would I say this? Yeah, I want to say abused, but she was the mistress of Scaramanga. Mm-hmm. And then, so she's being used by him to, send the golden bullets. And then with James Bond, once he catches up to her, what does he do? Well, something that when I first saw this scene, and you probably know which one I'm talking about, is, when he throws her on the bed and just like slaps her. I'm like, whoa. It's not my favorite Roger Moore moment, though, even though I know it's really not real, but it's something that we have seen in Bond movies, and going back to From Russia with Love. I'm trying to think of some other ones where he did that. I think he did in Diamonds Are Forever. He took the glove and slapped Jill St. John on the face also.
He rips off a woman's top in Diamonds Are Forever when he's looking, which I find really problematic, where he's like, where is Blofeld? And he rips off her top and starts choking her. There's also, I think is really problematic, is in License to Kill, when he throws Pam Bouvier on the bed, reaches up her skirt, takes out her gun, and he's like hovering over her threateningly. And there's a lot of like dynamics there dealing with like sex and power and violence. Mm-hmm. So yeah, there's a lot of these types of images. Yeah.
So I would say that's definitely, or those are examples of James Bond kind of being the villain also. I remember the documentary, Bond Girls Are Forever, and they're interviewing Maud Adams, and she's saying, oh, well, look at that. She, Bond goes into Octopussy's bedroom after she had closed the doors and forces himself on her, and just like kind of invites himself, in there. And I'm like, whoa. I was like, if you really think about that from a different standpoint, that's not cool.
No, and I think that one of the things that eventually I will write my paper on sexual consent in James Bond. I think that this is a big issue, this notion that, and it's not just James Bond, it is in so much of our media, this notion that when a woman says no, she doesn't actually mean it. And there's this whole idea, and it's part of our rape culture, that basically says when a woman says no, she doesn't mean it, you just have to try harder. So you've got to ask again, you have to, go kiss her, and even if she pushes you away, just kiss her again. And you see that with Pussy Galore in Goldfinger. You see, one of the things that I really don't like about Thunderball is the beginning portion with Patricia Fearing. And I think her name itself is one of those sort of double entendres that showcases her actual fear. She's sexually harassed by Bond. She doesn't want to sleep with him. She goes against his advances. But after he's attacked in Shrublands, he basically, she thinks she's going to lose her job. So he takes advantage of that situation and has sex with her. Yep. And I guess when I think about James Bond and I think about him being this, we think about him having this great libido and women are just attracted like moths to a flame. I think moments like that take away from his heroism. Mm-hmm. The fact that you need to be that violent and that forceful, to me, it means that there's a limitation in your character. Whether it's a limitation in your moral character and limitation in your abilities as a spy to be able to seduce your subjects. You can look at it in a variety of ways. So I think that instances like that, especially looking at it through a lens now where we're having a social conversation about consent in the last 5-10 years, notions of affirmative consent. So that you have to be not under any sort of substances, that you can make a decision, that when you say no at any point in time, whether it's verbally or through your body, that no means no. We're having these conversations now, but we're picking up from all of these problematic eras where we weren't having those types of conversations, where that was more of the norm. So it's interesting to think about it, watching it through the lens that we are watching it through today, and being uncomfortable with it. And I don't think discomfort is a bad thing. Mm-hmm. I always tell my students, if you are uncomfortable, that means that real work is happening, that you're seeing something, doing something that is sort of that's going against maybe things that we've been taught, like our systems of power, or that you're questioning your place within a broader system, or you're questioning your media and how you feel about it. So always sort of look at that discomfort and then use that as a stepping stone into analyzing the situation. So what is it about the media? What is it about society that's making you feel that way? So I don't think discomfort is bad. I think it just is the signal inside of us that something is going on.
Yeah. I know I was thinking of another couple examples is Live and Let Die, when Bond replaced the card or the trick deck for solitaire and just stole her virginity. It's like, oh, well, I mean, sure, we can, most casual fan would just go back and laugh at it, but that is a serious thing right there. At least in my mind, it is.
And he also knew that it took her power away from her, and that would put her in a perilous situation. And that was also after this exchange with Kananga. Sorry, I'm trying to think of the names that he had with Kananga, who basically said to her, like, you're my property and you will lose your power when I take it away from you. So you have this threat of violence against her already. And then Bond comes in and kind of does the same thing. But because it's James Bond and he used, a deck of cards and it's played up with funny music, that we're supposed to be like, oh, but it's okay that this guy, the white man, did it, right?
Yeah.
I think there's just some problematic elements with that through and through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as Vesperlin said, Bond thinks of women as indispensable pleasures.
Yep.
And she was right, because a lot of the times he does, and even all the way up to this time right now, recently with Spectre, I mean, you look at like an actress such as Monica Bellucci, and what was her real an amazing actress, but what was her real purpose in Spectre? Oh, he used her to get information, and then bye, I'm going to pass you off to Felix later, and I'm going to go catch a meeting. So,
and I'm not a fan of Spectre, so I'll throw that one right on the table.
I was going to ask, yeah.
I greatly dislike it, but when you cast someone like Monica Bellucci, who is a great actor, she was not utilized well at all in that film, and I'm mad at the scriptwriters, first of all. That is this notion that they're coming up with women just to still be sexual playthings that are sort of disposable figures. Like, it's when did Spectre come out? 2015?
That's correct. Yes.
It's 2015, right? We can do better. And then part of me sitting there thinking, it would have been an amazing film. Here's my pitch. If Monica Bellucci, if it turned out at the end, it turned out that she was Blofeld. That would have blown my world apart. That all of a sudden, like, since Electra King, we really haven't had a strong female villain. And so it would have been great if she was using Bond for this information and there was this whole narrative. And then it comes to the end of it where you realize she's the infamous Blofeld. I would have thought it would be amazing. At least you would have given her something substance to sink her teeth into.
Yeah, there were fan theories. I remember going on about that when they were making the movie and they saw her character. Like, is she Blofeld? And I'm like, that would be an interesting turn, because here you have this puppet of, just what not everything is, it appears, because we're all thinking Christoph Waltz isn't Blofeld. Okay, well, maybe that's true, because we were even asking him, oh, well, no, I'm not Blofeld, I'm so-and-so. It's like, okay, well, who's this mysterious, Monica Bellucci character? No, but she was just in there, sure, she's credited because she's higher billed, but she was in there for maybe 10 minutes total, just a grieving widow. And, he killed her husband and then has sex with her and then bye.
And especially when you think about the casting in that film with the guy who plays Moriarty in Sherlock, who played the boss of
Max Denby.
Yeah.
See.
So you have this guy that's like, he's like Sean Bean. Sean Bean's a living spoiler. Like, that when you see Sean Bean in a film, he's probably going to die. If he's in like a TV show, he's going to die. Like, that's just the way that he gets cast. And so you have this other character who like always plays these really villainous figures, and you've already cast him in your film. And then you have Christoph Waltz, who always plays these villains, and you have him cast in, and it's like, that they're going to be the bad guys. Wouldn't it be like just super duper amazing if we then have throw this wrench into the system and it's completely unexpected? That would have blown my mind.
Well, I don't want to say it's a problem with Bond films, and maybe it is, because it's just the formula of Bond. It's just, and the same goes for a lot of other, series and movies out there. It's just formulaic, and Bond has to save damsel in distress and goes after a bad guy and then, rides off into the sunset or sails off into the sunset, whatever it may be. But occasionally maybe a Bond girl might die here and there. But no, they need to be a little bit more creative, hopefully on the next one, with Bond 25. Jumping ahead here again, I know I would love to see a female villain at the least. I don't think that's going to happen at all. I think they're going to probably finish what they started with Spectre, if I had to be a betting man. I don't know.
I would just like there to not be another fraternal struggle for a surrogate parent. I mean, you had it in Skyfall, and then it was repeated in Spectre, and it was incredibly, incredibly boring for me. I was like, oh, really? Like, are we going to have like a grandpa be the next person that you're going to fight over? What about a cousin? What about a roommate? What about a teacher? Like, it was just...
Are you talking about Goldmember? Because that sounds familiar. Like Goldmember. Dad.
Just remake Goldmember into like a James Bond serious film. Like, come on.
It's really what they did. And Mr. Bigglesworth wasn't there, but I mean, yeah, they had the Pussycat in there instead. Yeah. And no Michael Caine. I know that I have a long list of things in my mind that I would like to see in the next Bond movie, and I highly doubt it would happen. One I think could happen is, and this is based on the success of a little small summer blockbuster movie that came out over the summer, was Wonder Woman, directed by Patty Jenkins. And well, first of all, did you see the movie? I have a feeling you did.
The answer is yes.
Because you said you did tell me previously, but I just had to ask again. What did you think of Wonder Woman, the movie?
Oh my gosh. I loved Wonder Woman. I thought it was a really empowering film. I went with my sister-in-law. I went with my niece. Obviously I brought my nephew and my brother and all that stuff. But just sort of sitting there watching this film with them, constantly looking at them in between scenes, our jaws were completely dropped. I felt really different after I left that film. It's as somebody who studies action women, I teach a course on female heroism in Hollywood at the University of Oklahoma. So I'm very attentive to the way that women are presented as heroes on screen. I felt that there was just something different going on in this film. You were being shown a female hero and her narrative in a very human way. And most often it's white men who get the human portrayal, and then any type of otherness. So if you're a black man, if you're a white woman, and if you have any other intersecting identities that are different from the status quo, you tend to be defined by those differences, right? And so to have a woman direct another woman in a film, it was this human narrative. And I think so many of us really haven't seen that in these films. And it doesn't mean that Wonder Woman is not problematic. I think that there could have been greater diversity, specifically with the Amazons. There's little bits and pieces here and there that could have been changed. But at the end of the day, I thought it was a really, really solid film. And people are talking about how this film might change roles for women moving forward, maybe greater opportunities for women as directors. There's a lot of people talking about that right now. I don't know if it's actually going to happen. I mean, we always seem to have these moments with certain films that are supposed to change the game, like Hunger Games was supposed to change the game, and Frozen was supposed to change the game, and Catherine Bigelow winning an Oscar was supposed to change the game, and the game has kind of stayed the same. But I really feel as though there's a lot of attention and momentum behind Wonder Woman, and I personally found it to be a really empowering film.
Yeah, I saw it twice. I went to see it on my own the first time, and then I dragged my wife. She wanted to see it, but I'm like, I think you're really going to enjoy this. This is not what you would, it's not a Batman movie, don't worry. I'm still trying to get her to watch a Batman movie with me, and she ends up conveniently falling asleep each time. That's okay, honey.
Tell her Batman, as I told you, Batman versus Superman, just fast forward the Batman and Superman parts and just let her watch the Wonder Woman part.
Then there's only 20 minutes in there then.
It's a very quick watch then. I mean,
there you go. Okay.
Right? 20 minutes. Just tell her 20 minutes, love. That's all I ask.
Who would have thought that Wonder Woman would be the one outshining Batman and Superman in their own movie? I mean, she did. Bottom line, she really did. And that's exactly what we got with Wonder Woman. Like I said, I really enjoyed Wonder Woman. Yeah, it had its flaws, more in the third act than the villain. I don't want to get into that so much, but What I wanted to ask you is, all right, Patty Jenkins, she accomplished something that most female directors haven't had a chance to accomplish yet. She directed a successful blockbuster movie that was critically and worldwide, acclaimed. And, now, I mean, I guess they're still negotiating. Last time I heard about her coming back, she says she has ideas and so forth, and she's probably on everybody's A-list to be the next director of maybe not just Wonder Woman, but a Star Wars movie. Who knows what? But, I mean, I'm not saying, Patty Jenkins should direct a James Bond film, but do you think this might open the possibility in the future, maybe not for Bond 25, I hope that the producers consider this, about a female director for James Bond?
I think that would be awesome. Mm-hmm. I don't see why not. I don't understand why women are kept out are kept out of having the ability to direct. It's not as if there are not talented women directors out there. There are a lot of talented women directors. The difference here is that there's a lack of opportunity, and there tends to be this belief or this understanding that action films or blockbuster films should be directed by men, that the genre is this masculine space. But this also goes back to the development of film into a business or an industry really in the 1920s and 30s. And these sort of traditional notions that men are the ones who are supposed to take care of business, that a director is the one who is supposed to handle sort of the money aspects like you would expect a businessman to do. And so in many ways, filmmaking has become a boys' club since the 1920s, and it's stayed that way. And it's really hard for women to break into those roles, but we're seeing changes. So for instance, Jessica Jones, the new season is going to be directed entirely by women. There's a show, I think it's called Queen Sugar.
I'm not sure.
On the O Network or Oprah's network, which is all directed by women. So we're getting a lot of women who are developing their resumes moving forward. So I think that we're just talking about it now in ways that we're not talking about it beforehand. And to see someone like Patty Jenkins have so much success, I think it can only help.
Yeah.
In terms of who would direct, I can't remember the woman's name who did The Night Manager, but I heard that she was on a short list at some point in time to direct the next James Bond film because of the success of The Night Manager, which I thought was a really great series. Mm-hmm. So I wouldn't mind having a woman directing these films. But I think what also needs to be put into perspective is just because you have a woman as a creative driving force, it doesn't mean that the images that you see are going to be necessarily better. And I'll take Barbara Broccoli, who's taken over the mantle. I think that there's some really positive women who have been represented underneath her tenure. But I look at a film like Skyfall and Spectre, which I think are quite regressive in terms of female representations. And she's also had a huge creative role in controlling these images. So just because a woman's there doesn't necessarily translate to, these perfectly feminist messages. But I think women who make up 51% of the population should be represented in parity in our media industry. I think that 50% of the stories should be told by women. I think 50% of the images that we see should be of women so that our media actually represents, it would actually represent the population that it is serving.
Yeah. Like you said, it doesn't guarantee it's going to be just, I don't want to say sweet in a way, but I think that's what some people, just old school beliefs anyway, might believe. Thinking, oh, well, a woman director, what can they really bring to the table? Well, I go all the way back to Catherine Bigelow in Point Break because she directed that. And it's one of my favorite Keanu Reeves movies. I'm like, and then after seeing the credits for that, I'm like, this was directed by a female? This was directed by James Cameron, well, actually executive produced, but by his ex-wife. I was like, right on. That's awesome. And it's still one of my favorite movies of his. And she knows how to do action. And that wasn't in any stretch of the mean salt. What's that?
And good action.
Yes, very good.
Yeah.
And, she was considered for the role, or for directing a Bond movie. I believe she did turn it down. But, I mean, if she were to come and do it, I don't think she would ever do it again, or can be considered, or she would consider it, just because the style of movies she's been making recently, like Detroit or Zero Dark 30, which are, well, I've seen Zero Dark 30. I have not had a chance to see Detroit. But I think there's a whole bunch of other female directors that are out there. I know that there's in TV series anyway, Breaking Bad. I know, Arrow, there's been female directors in those. There's so many possibilities out there. And I did want to go back to Spectre because or Skyfall and Spectre, because with Skyfall, it started off with the character of Naomi Harris, and happy belated birthday. She, playing Eve, or who was better known as Eve Moneypenny, but she was a field agent with James Bond. So at the beginning, it started off, oh, well, she's an equal with James Bond. She's out there fighting with the James Bond. Awesome. And she can shoot, she can do car chases and whatever else. But what ends up happening? Well, she shoots James Bond, and maybe some people wanted to do, or maybe some of the villains are, applauding her for that. But at the same time, though, what does she end up? She kind of goes backwards because, like you said, what does she end up being? The secretary to a man to Ralph Fiennes, and it's just kind of going back in a different direction. Whereas Casino Royale, we had Judi Dench, who was the female boss, with a man who was her assistant. Mm-hmm. And, the more I thought about it recently, I'm like, this it kind of sucks. And I mean, I do really enjoy, Naomi Harris as Moneypenny. And, maybe she'll get more time. Maybe she could become a field agent. Maybe they can put some kind of spin on that. I highly doubt it. But yeah, it's kind of like they did take a step backwards with that. And as for Severin and Skyfall, yeah, what was her real purpose in that? He used her. He was a girl who wanted to get help and get out from Mr. Silva, and she just was what do I say, an untimely demise, unfortunately, and she was just expendable, and nobody cared aside from the Scotch. Good waste of Scotch. And unfortunately, I think we've almost, going back to GoldenEye, I think that was probably more timely than Spectre was, without a doubt.
I agree with you. And I agree with your assessment of Moneypenny, with this notion of she's demoted and she is institutionally disciplined she followed orders. She said the shot was not good. She was told to take the bloody shot, and she took the bloody shot. But then you see her go through this process where she doesn't get a redemption narrative. James Bond gets one. Felix Leiter in his Craig era films goes against orders, and he ends up getting promoted. And she's somebody who just is completely demoted through that film. And I feel as though there was potential with Spectre to give her a moment to really redeem herself. So you have this trained field agent who is the secretary or personal assistant to M, right? To Gareth Mallory and his office. And you have this end scene where Mallory is there with Q in that space, and then they have the confrontation with the bad guy. Where was she? She was downstairs somewhere else away from the action. Wouldn't it have been great if she becomes everybody thinks she's a secretary, but she's actually like a bodyguard or assistant. She just comes in and has the opportunity to shoot that gun. And I don't think it would have taken anything away from James Bond for her to do that, but it would have given her that redemption narrative and showcased her training.
Right. In Skyfall, they did when M was giving her testimony to I guess to the prime minister, and Bond kicks over the Glock to her, and she picks it up and starts shooting and so forth. So I did like that. I like seeing that kind of a role, and I think that Naomi Harris is definitely the actress that could pull that off. And they need to, like I said, if I had a wish list for Bond 25, the biggest thing I would say is bring back a kind of like an Electric King villain. And because I think a lot of people forget about Sophie Marceau, and Sophie Marceau did such a good job, because when I watched that, the first time I ever watched that, I'm like, she's the main Bond girl and she's going to ride off in the sunset with him, when that was typically what it was, going back from GoldenEye to Tomorrow Never Dies. And then when I watched that movie, I'm like, what? She's the villain this whole time? She played him? She used him? And, I think that's something that, we've been longing for, or at least I think that a lot of fans are, because it puts a totally different spin on there. It's not what you think. So if we could finally see something like that again, I mean, it's just, and that falls into the cookie cutter of James Bond movies sometimes. Sometimes they really are. It's just the same old thing. Spectre went back to that.
Yeah. And I felt that was the whole point of Spectre. You have I call it sort of the orphan origin trilogy that this revisionist trilogy that started off the Craig era, where you're completely deconstructing the Bond film, adjusting some elements and gradually reintroducing them in. Some of them successful, some of them maybe not so. And of course, fans saying, like, where's the martini? You know, where's Q? Where's Moneypenny? I mean, there's definitely many voices sort of pushing them in that direction. You sort of have this trilogy and then it ends. And I had hoped that Spectre was going to be a standalone forward-facing narrative rather than another backward-facing narrative. Like, you had already just established and set things in place. You didn't need Spectre to come in and put a rubber stamp on it and just try to do the exact same thing again and try to tie up loose ends. And I think one of my issues with Spectre is the fact that, unlike the Marvel Cinematic Universe, where films are being planned in multiple stages, where this film is going to connect to that film, and so this particular line of dialogue is going to then influence that particular character, and it's sort of like a web or a network. I feel as though the Craig era films came one at a time, and by the time you got to Spectre, there was this goal of going back and trying to piece together different threads that were not actually like necessarily designed to be pieced together. And so that's why I think that Spectre just completely falls.
Yeah.
And so I hope that with the next film, or if there's a goal to do 2 more Craig era films, right? If he signed on, I don't know if he signed on for 1 or 2, or if he's going to shoot them both at the same time or whatever it is, that there is this notion of looking forward and not backwards, and not trying to like retie what has already been tied. Like, the horse is dead. You don't need to beat on it anymore. Like, we got it. But move forward. And the question is, are there ways then to innovate the Bond film in the way that, you know, Casino Royale kind of did? Casino Royale brought in a lot of energy and excitement for a James Bond film, and and with playing and tweaking with conventions. Is there a way moving forward? And I would like to add to your list of things I would like to see.
By all means.
I think one of the things for me that's missing in the Craig era films is the sense of excitement and adventure. And you get it in a film like The Kingsman, where that film it's bright. The action is super exciting. It's over the top, and it's a serious film, but at the same time, it is still fun to watch. And when I watched The Kingsman, I thought, I mean, it's got its problems with gender. I mean, we can talk about that at some other time. That the fact that like the true Kingsman is actually a woman, and then she's sent to space during the climax of the film. Anyways, I'm still really mad about that. But the film is exciting to watch, and you're having fun, but it's serious at the same time. I feel like the Craig era films, just because of the nature of going back into Bond's history, are just so incredibly serious. I would like to see there being, and again, it might go against, you know, this era, but I want something a tad bit brighter visually, and maybe brighter in terms of its tone, so that I feel like I'm having more fun and like not looking at my watch like I did when I watched Spectre. I was literally like in the movie theater being like, oh, okay, well, there's another 45 minutes. So what's coming?
To go back, I would say that about how you said Marvel movies are planned out. I will give that to Marvel. While I might not enjoy all their movies, they do have a plan. Studios like Warner Brothers that deal with the Batman movies and the DCU, they are reactionary, and that's been a proven thing. Especially now with Wonder Woman, the success with that, they struck gold with that. Now, how are they going to move forward with the rest of their cinematic universe? But that's another story for another day. James Bond, they don't plan it out. They were planning one film at a time. How they did it back in the 60s, I'm not exactly sure, because they were able to produce a Bond movie every single year immediately after Dr. No, From Russia with Love, Goldfinger, Thunderball, You Only Live Twice. There was a quick turnaround with that.
They had novels. They had novels to go from. I mean, they didn't do them in order, but at least you had some basic content that you could that could structure your film. So it wasn't coming up with an original idea. It was an adaptation.
Right. And yeah, I think something, a big factor in the serious, dark, gritty tone, and I hate saying dark and gritty, but there's really nothing else to call it, is the Bourne movies. Something that's come up here before. Because the serious spy, more realistic kind of spy film, action thriller, and then the success of the Dark Knight trilogy. That's something, because, you know, a more character-based drama action movie. And I think that's something that, I guess that they're going to fit. Hopefully they tie things up with Bond 25 completely, and it goes off on a good note compared to how it was with Quantum. While I do enjoy that, and I do enjoy Spectre for certain things. I mean, it's not my favorite, but I do like it. It's, Casino Royale and Skyfall are way higher than for that. But, yeah, I would
like Quantum of Solace. I really like,
Really?
I like it. I like the way that the elemental is used in it. I like the conversation about having like an energy or environmental company being a front for this villainous organization. I thought that Quantum was going to be the new Spectre, so I thought that was exciting. Yeah. And then I loved Camille Montez in it because I felt that she was the first woman to walk away from Bond because he was unable to love her, and that reminded me of Gala Brand in the novel Moonraker. Like, there was so much about that film. I mean, there's some holes in the plot, sure, but overall there's things about that film, like visually, narratively, thematically, that I really enjoy. And I think that it gets overlooked a lot in conversations. And so I do recommend to anybody listening, just give it another shot. Yeah. Now that you've seen Spectre, just go and give it another shot. Because if you watch it and they're like, wow, that's much better than Spectre.
Yeah, Quantum of Solace. I guess when I remember seeing the teaser trailer for it, they had the flashbacks of him and Vesper, black and white, and she's drowning herself. And I'm like, oh, if they really are going with that as like a true sequel to Casino Royale, I can't wait to see this. Because, when I see a trailer, and I'm sure a lot of people do this, you paint a picture in your head of what you would want to see. And sometimes it ends up being that way. And sometimes it ends up being different, maybe for better or for worse. And, Quantum happened so fast. I guess the movie went by so quickly that I'm like, wow. I was like, I need time to see this again. And then after seeing it again, because it's so fast paced, because it's the editing, I think that gives me the problem with it. And the fact that the story there, it came, I always make this excuse, even though it is true, the writer's strike that came around the time of that movie. And Craig had to, I believe, help write that movie in a way, or kind of improvise in such way. And if you notice that movie, it's action sequence, a little bit of story, action sequence, a little bit of story, and then so forth. But the times where it slows down with the characters, especially Renee Mathis, him talking to Bond about, forgive her, forgive yourself. That almost makes me cry every time. It really does, because it's so sad. I didn't want to see him die.
And you saw also in those scenes, James Bond being so love sick. And he's drinking these martinis, these Vesper martinis, because that's the only way that he can be close to her, that he can consume her. And I don't really think that Bond has lamented people dying before. But usually it takes place at the end of the film. Even when it was Tracy, his wife, we have all the time in the world, and then he like cries and then it's over, right? Like his head goes down and it's over. Whereas someone like Vesper, Lind, we have an entire movie of seeing the sorrow that he is going through and the actions that he's taken and his inability to connect with Camille and his connection with Matt. Like I
hear you.
I'm with you there. Like it definitely is. Yeah. The most emotional aspect of Bond that I think I've seen.
Mm-hmm. It's not a happy movie by any stretch of the means, but it is one that I think that, some people might be able to sympathize with just like relationships even, or just losing someone that you've loved in a way, or whatever, and just seeing it from Bond's perspective, because we never had a chance to see that after On Her Majesty's Secret Service. What do you have? You have Sean Connery returning in Diamonds Are Forever, and we'll build, we have a space laser that's going to destroy the world. And sorry, I have my quest with Diamonds Are Forever. It's my least favorite James Bond film, even though I love Sean Connery. Anyway, but I would say that the character of Camille, her backstory is great, and she sold me when she's telling James Bond her backstory about how how the general killed her family and the fire, and how she almost loses it when she's in the fire at the very end of the movie. So well done. She never gets enough credit for that, and a lot of people are saying there's a big rumor out there right now that she could come back, or I think more that fans want her to come back for this next Bond movie. I say leave her story be, just move on to something different.
I'd also like to say, can we let Madeline Swan be? I don't want her coming back. in the next Bond film from Spectre.
Well, that goes back to my wish list. I have two things on my wish list. One includes her, one doesn't. And I say do something more of like a standalone film and learn from your competition, if you want to call it competition, like the Mission Impossible movies. Have you seen any of the Mission Impossible movies?
Yeah.
Okay. So the one I always go back to is Ghost Protocol. And the reason for that is because at the end of the third one, because there's 5 Mission Impossible movies now anyway. So at the end of the third one, he gets married and he goes away with his wife. But then all of a sudden he comes back and he's in a prison and his wife is, where's his wife? Well, they give a quick explanation of that and then move on with the rest of the story. I'd love to see that in the next Bond movie. Just give a quick explanation. Guess what? The way of, Bond can't just settle down. That's not the kind of person he is. He comes back to MI6 and let's just have a really cool, fun, exciting mission. Something like a Goldfinger even. I don't know. Something, if you want to have steal a couple nukes, I don't know, but have fun with it.
Yep.
As fun as you can with stealing 2 nukes, because they did in Thunderball and they made it work. At least I think they did.
That would actually align it with what happens in the novels. In the novels, at the beginning, so basically at the end of a novel, Bond is typically with a woman, and at the start of the next novel, there's usually a discussion as to why she's no longer there.
Yeah.
So for instance, you learn that, I can't remember what book, but the one after From Russia with Love, you learn that Tatiana Romanova died, and it's just sort of in passing, and she died, and you're like, okay, it's no longer there. Or that his engagement with, I think, Tiffany Case didn't work out. Mm-hmm. And it's used as a matter-of-fact way where you're like, okay, then it didn't work out because, 50% of marriages end in divorce. So, I mean, let's roll the odds that it's probably not going to work out. There's a 50-50 shot, right? And if it was just some brief mention, it didn't work out, and then move on from it, you've solved the problem. There's still this notion of continuity. And we can move forward with, like you said, something exciting, adventurous, no baggage from the past. I mean, haven't we dealt with all of his baggage already?
I think Daniel Craig's been through enough where it's time for him to have a little bit more fun. You saw signs of it in Spectre where he was having some fun, but I think that, I don't know, just sometimes, why do we go to the movies? Why do I watch Bond movies, especially, and Batman movies? Because I want to forget about what's going on in the world. Not that, I live in denial probably, but because those take me into a different world full of action and just, I love spending time with these characters. Mm-hmm. I want to see more Q labs. I really like the new Q, by the way.
Yeah, I would love to see it focusing in on him and different gadgets. Can we bring back more gadgets? We're in such a great technological space right now. And especially with Apple being interested in supporting, or something with Amazon. I mean, Amazon carries everything. There has to be a way of connecting, or Bond is on some island and then he gets 2-day shipping Amazon Prime or something like that. It would be amazing, right? But it would be this technological gadget, or I don't know, some drone brings it to him. I don't know. There's ways of doing it to make it, like you said, interesting, exciting. And I think you can still deal with serious issues in the world. You can still have villains that are reflecting our social problems and the geopolitics of the time. But I think you can also do it in a way that is creatively imagining and resolving these situations, but in a way that's fun, that's not going to depress us all. Mm-hmm. There are ways of making these films and finding, say, a balance or a blend between what you got in the Craig era films and what came beforehand. There has to be a blend. There has to be a way to merge the two.
Just no surfing on ice glaciers. That's all I ask. Even though that is possible from what I understand from a prior interview. Yeah. But no, I was thinking, and maybe you enjoy this one. I know this is one of my most guilty pleasures is Die Another Day because I'm such a big Pierce Brosnan Bond fan. They took on topics such as North Korea, which is more timely than ever, but they still put a fun spin on it. At least I think they did. But if they could do something like put Daniel Craig more, or write something more tailored for Pierce Brosnan, I don't know, something along those lines. I don't know. There's a whole bunch of different things they could do with this, but I'm worried that they're going to play it safe. I really do. Purvis and Wade, they've written some great Bond movies, all the way back to The World's Not Enough, which I think doesn't get enough credit. I really don't.
I agree with you there.
Die Another Day, it is what it is. But they did help write all the way up to Spectre, but that was more off the work of John Logan, who even wrote part of Skyfall, and he wrote Gladiator. So it depends, but I think that the whole sequel and just have one fun adventure, just let him do his thing and, have some cool gadgets. It's hard with the gadgets, though, to compete with all these other spy movies that are out there, especially like you mentioned, Kingsman, because, that umbrella and the, what's the other guy? I just watched recently. I'm trying to think of another gadget that's in there. I don't know. I don't know. There's a new kind of powerful lasso in the Golden Circle trailer. Looks pretty cool. I enjoy the Kingsman movies. I think that's something that Bond movies can learn from. And what's so funny is they make all the comparisons in the movie to James Bond. It's not that kind of a movie. I'm like, oh, I like that. Thank you, Matthew Vaughn. Maybe you can come direct a Bond film eventually. Just maybe not as bloody. Maybe not a rated R one. I still want it to be PG-13. I know we're running out of time here. And yes, you did mention this, and I was going to have to probably mention on the next episode because we're short on time. But yes, Apple and Amazon have put in bids for the James Bond distribution rights. I know that while we know that the next Bond film will come out in November 2019, Daniel Craig is definitely coming back. Neil Purvis and Robert Wade are going to be writing it. That's about the extent that we know. Other than that, it's all full of rumors. But knowing now what happened in the news about Apple and Amazon putting in bids, I got to say I'm nervous about that because I wanted to go through a big studio. But I guess at the same time, they're thinking, oh, well, the times are changing and streaming services are where it's at. But I just want to make sure that I can still go into the theaters and experience that Bond film, and it's not just going to be like a shared cinematic universe. That's my biggest fear.
Yeah, and I don't know what. I don't know what the bids are and how much say Apple and Amazon would have if there's greater flexibility going in that direction, less oversight going in that direction. For you to be able to sort of do what you want to do, or maybe the goal is to try to tap into, like you said, I think that the landscape of our media is changing in the way that it is being produced, in the way that it is being distributed, in the way that it's being consumed. Mm-hmm. And so on the one hand, this could be a way to sort of capitalize and find fresh new ideas and ways to move forward. But on the other hand, I don't know what that means. I don't know what that looks like for a series of this nature.
Yeah, I know that MGM is the one, and Eon Productions are the ones that control the James Bond, the main distribution rights, but because MGM is, I guess, I don't want to say smaller company, it's one of the older companies that are out there, but it needs another company more recently, such as Sony, with all the Craig era Bond films, to really market it, to really distribute it. Maybe, Apple has they have all the money in the world. There, I said it. Mm-hmm. Amazon, well, there you go. They have the Amazon Prime and they have their own streaming service also. And they put out a movie, or at least a few over this summer or in this year, that actually did go into theater. So I guess the more I think about it, it might not be a bad thing. I just don't want it to take away from it just being just a TV series or, well, I was going to say James Bond Jr., even though I barely remember it. I don't want it to just be something like that.
Class. I actually showed that in my gender and James Bond class. I showed them a clip of like James Bond Jr. and they're like, what is this? I'm like, this is what happens when you have a hiatus in the James Bond franchise. Like,
yep. I know that I barely remember the theme song. No, I'm not going to sing it right now. But I do know that
James Bond Jr.
That's like one of those, what do they call it? Earworms that just stick in your head the rest of the day. Yep. Thank you. Appreciate that.
You're welcome for that, whoever's listening.
Much appreciated. Wrapping it up, though, I would say that, one of the strongest Bond girls, I do want to make sure I mention this one, or Bond females, I'm sorry, is Judi Dench. She's one of the biggest game changers for the Bond franchise.
Yes.
And
I agree with you. And I keep thinking when you bring up GoldenEye and how it's one of your favorite films, how it's one of my favorite films, just the way that she is introduced, where she's like, you don't like me, Bond. You don't like my methods. You think I'm, this bean counter. And she's like, I think you're a sexist, misogynistic dinosaur and a relic of the Cold War, whose boyish charms have, certainly worked on that woman. And she's like, I've got no compunction about not sending you to your death, but it won't be on a whim. And I'm just like, she threw it down.
Point taken.
Threw it all out there, said what like so many of us have thought before. And his face was like, oh, okay, now I see. And you see him reacting to this, strong, empowered woman who's not going to put up with his crap. Mm-hmm. I loved it. I think that she, across the Brosnan era films, is this force to be reckoned with. And then she goes to the Craig era and she becomes a maternal sort of figure, and she's disempowered over the Craig era films. Just seeing her, I think I post it all the time on Twitter. Like, I keep referencing anytime I teach it, anytime I see it on, TV, I always have to just put up her quotes because yes.
Yes. Judi Dench, just how she gives Tanner the lecture. It's like, oh, this lady. Oh, okay. And then, we didn't get to see as much of her until Skyfall. Well, actually, Quantum, you do get to see quite a lot of it. I think she's more the main Bond girl than Olga Kurylenko, and she definitely was in Skyfall. She is the main Bond girl in there, which I really did enjoy. That, see, that's fresh in my mind because you're not taking just a supermodel and putting her as the Bond girl. You're taking an actress, a well-credited, I believe she is Oscar-winning actress. And,
she's won everything.
Yeah, she's that good. And, you just put her in this role and it's something different. I like seeing those kind of things. And just how her and Bond have that mother-son relationship, which I know I have sometimes with my mom. Sometimes when I'm just like, oh, Mom, you're such a pain in the ass. You really are. But I love you at the same time. And, it was a shame to see her go, but I think they did it the best way that they possibly could. And,
although, part of me just kind of wished, as she's there with Silva at the end, that she would have been the one to have pulled the trigger.
Oh, you wanted her to pull a domino.
I wanted her just to you have this moment. And I felt that I get that. I mean, the whole narrative, it's Judi Dench. You got to give her a narrative, right? So you have to develop this character. But I felt like they just kept emphasizing how old she was and disempowered and old and disempowered. And I just thought there's this moment where you can just kill Silva. And then you can die in Bond's arms.
Yeah. Oh, it's so sad too. It's still really sad, but yeah. What I did like is that, they said for a long time that they've had Judi Dench there, and now let's finally use it. Let's use her in Casino Royale because she can act. And even in Casino Royale, she's putting Bond in his place. I knew it was too early to promote you. And, just how she just talks down to him. Damn it. We meant to question him, not to kill him. And, oh man, I'm going to have a Bond marathon tonight. I really am. But yeah, Judi Dench. And, I hope we get more roles like that. I hope they do a Moneypenny spin like they did in GoldenEye also, because, this kind of a behavior can qualify as sexual harassment. And I'm like, ooh, yeah, something, we can learn a lot from GoldenEye. So if you, I don't know if you offer an online course, but I think I might have to enroll in that. I would go back to school for that.
I offer it in class, in person, because I when I first brought it forward, we tested it out as an online class. So I'd like to thank the University of Oklahoma and specifically the Women's and Gender Studies program for allowing me to run with this, for taking a risk on it. But it was so popular online that students kept saying, we want to talk about this in person. We don't just want to have discussion boards. We need to have in-class conversations about James Bond. And so that's why I pushed and it's now in person. But I'll probably will offer online sections as well because people are really interested in it. So
I knew I should have gotten into business when I was getting my major. I knew I was way off even to this day. Oops. Real quick, I just want to mention a couple birthdays that are being celebrated this week. If you are a fan of music scores, the one and the only Hans Zimmer celebrates a birthday on September 12th, and he actually did write the Wonder Woman theme. Yeah, that kick-ass Wonder Woman theme that I jam out to sometimes when I'm running. I got to see him in concert this past summer, and he's even better live. And just seeing his whole 40 to 50 person orchestra up there, it's amazing. So if you're a fan of scores, listen to the Wonder Woman score. Batman v Superman actually has that included in it, but he did the whole Dark Knight trilogy score along with James Newton Howard. So happy birthday, sir. He celebrates a birthday on September 12th. Richard Kiel celebrates a birthday on September 13th. Yes, he played Jaws. No, I'm not talking about the shark. I'm talking about how tall was he? At least 7 foot, maybe. I don't know. Give or take. He played Jaws in The Spy Who Loved Me, and he returned in Moonraker. I didn't like him as much in Moonraker, I gotta be honest, but it was still nice to see Jaws in there. And then, and as his famous one line in there says, "Here's to us." Tommy Lee Jones celebrates a birthday on September 15th. He played Harvey Two-Face in Batman Forever. Happy birthday, Tommy Lee Jones. I'm going to leave it at that. Katarina Marina, celebrates a birthday also on September 15th. She played Solange in Casino Royale. Colin McFarlane, if you don't know the name, that's okay. He celebrates a birthday on September 15th. He played Commissioner Loeb in Batman Begins and The Dark Knight. And director Guy Hamilton celebrates a birthday this week. On September 16th, he was the director of one of my favorite James Bond movies, Goldfinger, Diamonds Are Forever, Live and Let Die, and The Man with the Golden Gun. And there are your birthdays. So that wraps it up for this episode of the Batman vs. James Bond show. Lisa, thank you so much for being on the show. Where can everybody find you? If you want them to find you.
If you'd like to hear me talk more about James Bond online, I'm at Cinema on Fire. That's my Twitter handle. That's probably the best way to contact me or to stay engaged. I'm pretty engaged on Twitter. I talk with Bond. There's a bunch of us Bond scholars who are on Twitter, like Klaus Dodds, who I wrote Geographies, Genders, and Geopolitics of James Bond with. Lots of people who contributed articles to my anthology on the women of James Bond. But there's also like amazing critics and fans and people who have amazing websites. There's a ton of us who are just having constant conversations about James Bond. So I think we would love you to join in with us, to give us your thoughts and to be able to engage with you. I think it's a passion for all of us. So
definitely,
let's do it.
Yeah, it's almost a way of life for me. As much, I'm not ashamed to say that. I think more recently, as I've gotten older, now that I can dress more like James Bond, I do take advantage of that. I know I was dressing more of a Quantum of Solace outfit yesterday just for work, and nobody knows that but me. But hey, you know what? If I can try to, look like James Bond, maybe not as suave, why not?
Why not?
Why not? And you can't wear a tux to work. I mean, that would be so silly, but I can't do weddings. You can follow me on all the various social media networks, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Batman vs. Bond. Please subscribe on Spreaker, iTunes, rate it 5 stars, and leave a nice review for me on there. I would very much appreciate it. The biggest thing I always ask is that you share the show with your friends, your family, anyone who is a fan of Batman and James Bond. Tell them there is a podcast for Batman and James Bond movies, the best of both worlds. Yes, I'm making that Van Halen reference because it is so true. And you can find me on BatmanVSBond.com and on the BS Podcast Network. And hey, don't forget to buy a t-shirt. Lisa, once again, thank you for being on the show. You are always welcome back.
Thank you for having me.
And like James Bond, I will return. Until next time, I'm Brian Thomas. Thanks for listening and have a great week, everyone. Bye-bye.
The preceding podcast is part of the BS Podcast Network. Visit bspodcastnetwork.com for more shows just like this one, and perhaps a few that are just a little bit better.